Hey guys, welcome to Unit 6, which is on industrialization and economic development. Unit 6 covers chapters 15, 16, and 17 in your AMSCO books. And today we are going to talk about chapter 15, which is industrialization and economic structure. Chapter's essential question is, how did the diffusion of industrialism affect people around the world? By the end of this unit, you will understand that the Industrial Revolution, as it diffused from its heart, facilitated improvements in standards of living. Measures of development are used to understand patterns of social and economic differences at a variety of scales. Development is a process that varies across space and time. And sustainable development is a strategy to address resource depletion and environmental degradation. The unit overview: the hearth of the Industrial Revolution was Great Britain in the 18th century. So it started in Great Britain in the 1700s as people learned to use water power and coal energy to manufacture goods. They saw large increases in agricultural productivity, which is that second agricultural revolution, population growth, and wealth. Industrialization has diffused throughout the world, reshaping all aspects of life. Measures of development. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, people have developed statistical measures to describe changes in society. Some measure the total output of each country, the distribution of income, rates of childbirth, the number of people who can read, the rates of literacy, and the different opportunities available to males and females. Scholars such as W. Rostow and Emanuel Wallerstein use this information to create models, which we're going to learn about, or theories of spatial patterns of economic and social development in countries around the world. Then we see variations in development. The diffusion of industrialization generally increased trade and interdependence, which improved the standard of living for most people around the world. But as jobs moved from one place to another, some people lost their jobs and an international division of labor emerged. One cost was to the environment. In response to the depletion of natural resources, pollution, and the results of climate change, some people have advocated an evolved model that stresses sustainable development. At the end of this first section, you'll be able to explain the role of the Industrial Revolution in the growth and diffusion of industrialization. So industrialization began in response to new technologies and was facilitated by the availability of natural resources. So one of the reasons why the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain is because the island is basically one big hunk of coal. So they had the natural resource needed to power the Industrial Revolution. The diffusion of industrialization also led to growing populations. If you guys remember back to Unit 2, what actually starts countries moving into stage 2 of the demographic transition is the Industrial Revolution. So this really started population growth and increased food supply, which also helps population to grow, which freed workers to seek industrial jobs in cities. So this also is what is going to play the major role in urbanization. Increased industrialization led to demands for raw materials and search for new markets, and was a factor in the rise of colonialism and imperialism. Two main things that we're going to talk about in this first section is the Industrial Revolution and how that relates to population growth and urbanization. The Industrial Revolution was a set of changes in technology that dramatically increased manufacturing productivity. It really started with the steam engine, and that was really the first mechanically powered engine, and we used it for all sorts of different things, from transportation to agriculture. It reshaped how people worked and behaved, where they lived, and how they related to each other spatially. So the diffusion of the Industrial Revolution. The start, so we said, was in the mid-1700s, and it was like tossing a rock in a pond. It caused a large initial splash in England, and then the ripples spread outward from there. So it was really expansion diffusion from England. On a large scale, the first continents and countries affected were near England, so France and the Netherlands. Then by the mid-1800s, industrialization had spread east to Germany and west to the United States. By the early 1900s, it had reached all of Europe, Japan, parts of China, and South America. And today, most of the world is considered industrialized. On a smaller scale within countries, the first factories were usually built near sources of power, such as rivers or coal deposits, and near transportation routes. With the development of electrical power and the construction of new roads, canals, and harbors, later factories were added in more diverse locations. As the Industrial Revolution progressed, improvements in farm machinery and farm techniques, along with the enclosure movement, increased agricultural productivity. Machine power replaced human and animal power. Hence, many people in rural areas were no longer needed for their labor. So this is known as the movement from animate power, which would be animals, to inanimate power, which would be machines. These displaced farm workers moved to towns and cities, causing an explosion in urban populations everywhere. And the urban residents, they promoted the growth of industries in two crucial ways. As workers, they toiled in factories running the machines that made textiles, steel, and other products. And as consumers, they provided a market for the expanding quantities of food and manufactured goods. Without the Industrial Revolution, most of the people on this planet, there'd be a lot less of us, and we'd all still basically be in agriculture. So it's the Industrial Revolution that leads to kind of the modern life that we're all living today. The second really important thing to understand about the Industrial Revolution was its effect on population in cities. As the number of industries and factory cities increased and rural to urban migration continued, cities grew rapidly. London grew from 1 million people in 1800 to 6 million people by 1900. Old systems for handling human waste, burying the dead, and cleaning up horse manure were overwhelmed. Since people burned wood and coal to heat their homes and run factories, air pollution increased to harmful, even deadly levels. In some weeks, smog got so bad that it doubled the normal rate of death. Over time, people supported stronger government action to build sewers, regulate cemeteries, and so on to protect public health. So if you had a time machine and you were able to travel back to the 1880s in London, you would be knocked down at how absolutely disgusting it was in terms of the smell, in terms of the smog and pollution and all of those things. So we've come a long way when it comes to dealing with all of those problems. And today in developed countries, our cities are much cleaner and much less polluted than they were at the height of the Industrial Revolution. Public health measures became increasingly important as cities became even more dense by expanding vertically. So we start building up instead of out. The development of elevators, stronger and more affordable steel, and techniques to construct stronger foundations combined allowed for taller buildings. Cities also expanded horizontally. Improvements in intra-urban transportation, such as trains, cars, and trucks, allowed cities to spread out farther from the downtown core. People could live farther from their workplace and still commute to work easily. This really takes off with the automobile in the 1900s. And food could be transported from the countryside into cities to feed a growing population. Next section is about the growth and diffusion of industrialization. So we're going to talk about colonialism and imperialism, which were really driven in part by industrialization, and also Fordism and post-Fordism, which is named after the process started by Henry Ford with the assemblies line and interchangeable parts manufacturing. The Industrial Revolution built on the earlier rise of imperialism, a policy of extending a country's political and economic power. As countries such as Great Britain and France industrialized, they recognized the value of controlling trading posts and colonies around the world. Colonies provided several resources and other contributions to the economy. Raw materials such as sugar, cotton, foodstuffs, lumber, and minerals could be used in mills and factories. Labor to extract raw materials, markets where manufacturers could sell finished products, ports where trading ships could stop to get resupplied, and profits to use for investing in new factories, canals, and railroads. By the early 1900s, several other European countries and the United States had also had far-flung possessions, meaning colonies. The development of imperialism made wealthy countries even wealthier, leading to a great divide between the advanced industrialized states and the underdeveloped non-industrialized states, many of which used to be colonies. And we still see this divide today. We call it the more developed countries and the less developed countries. Fordism and post-Fordism. In the 19th century, production increased with a shift from a system of cottage industry in which people would weave cloth and make products in their homes to a system of large factories with machines powered by water or coal. So prior to the Industrial Revolution, people basically, everything that they owned was made in their village by local people inside their homes, which is what cottage industry was. After the Industrial Revolution, we know now today most of our clothes are made on the complete opposite side of the world. But each product was often made individually. Early in the 20th century, Henry Ford took another big step in advancing productivity by developing the assembly line, in which an item moved from worker to worker, with each worker performing the same task repeatedly. The use of assembly lines also allowed companies to produce more standardized products more rapidly and with less skilled workers than ever before. This system of mass production is known as Fordism, soon became standard practice across industries. It started with car manufacturing, but it grew to basically all industries. Capitalists copied his methods, as did communists. Ford became a cult hero in Russia because it was through economic efficiency that Russian workers realized they might become productive enough to achieve the goals of communism. As consumers, people appreciated the cost of goods plummeted. However, as workers, people resented how dull and repetitive the assembly line made work. Fordism quickly changed manufacturing. One issue was the lack of variety. Every product was identical to every other product. Since not every customer wanted a black car identical to their neighbor's black car, companies gradually modified the assembly line process to produce more varied products. These changes added time and cost to the process. In recent years, with the use of computers and increased automation, every product coming off the assembly line can be different. In modern factories, the substitution principle, in which businesses seek to maximize profit by substituting one factor of a production for another, has been applied to a significant percentage of the labor force. Through mechanization, also known as automation, companies have replaced workers with machines. For example, U.S. industrial output doubled between 1984 and 2015, but industrial employment declined by 1/3. And this week, you guys are going to watch a film about U.S. manufacturing, and you'll see that today we actually make more stuff than we've ever made before. We just don't need as many industrial workers because really it's machines that took the jobs. Yes, did some jobs go overseas? Absolutely, but most of the manufacturing jobs in the US have been replaced by machines, and that means they're not coming back. Although expensive to install, the machines often save a company money over the long term. They can work 24 hours a day without breaks or vacations, and they produce consistent, high-quality work. The workers who don't lose their jobs are often trained to do more than one job, so they can rotate among a few different workstations during a day. These changes in production process constitute the basis of what is known today as the post-Fordist system, which is the manufacturing system that we primarily use today in developed countries. So the second big part of Chapter 15 is understanding the economic sectors and industrial location. By the end of this section, you'll be able to identify the different economic sectors. The economy consists of primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and quinary sectors. So you can see by this chart, the primary sector of the economy is resource-based and extractive activities. That means people who are working directly with extracting natural resources from the surface of the earth. So that's going to be things like farmers, it's going to be loggers, it's going to be miners, those people who are working directly with the Earth's natural resources. The secondary sector is manufacturing based activities. So that's people who are taking those raw materials and turning them into a tangible product. So that's mainly going to be like factory workers. The tertiary sector is the service-based activities. So this is things like education and transportation and those kinds of things. People who, like me, are not making a tangible product, but we are providing a service to other people. Quaternary sector is knowledge-based activities. So this is going to be people who are even higher up in terms of the service sector of the economy. And then quinary is going to be the intellectually based macro level activity. So this is like the top people. So that would be, CEOs and things like that. Some economists analyze a country's workforce by dividing it into three sectors according to how closely people work with natural resources. The composition of a country's economy changes over time. When the United States was formed in the 1700s, nearly everyone farmed or did other work in the primary sector. Today, in the United States and other developed countries, the primary sector usually employs less than 5% of the labor force. In a least developed country, that figure is over 70%. So in highly developed countries today, there's hardly any people who are working in farming or mining or those kind of jobs, mainly because they've become so automated. But in less developed countries, a huge percentage of the population are still working in agriculture. The tertiary sector is also known as the service sector because it consists of providing services to people and businesses. It includes people involved in real estate, in automobile repair, plumbing, the restaurant industry, accounting. And in developed countries where manufacturing, the secondary sector, is on the decline, the tertiary sector is expanding and dominated in labor force, which means in countries like the United States, the majority of the workforce is in the tertiary sector. Those countries that are kind of in the middle in terms of development have a larger percentage of people in that secondary sector. So that would be countries like Mexico and even China that have a large percentage of their workforce who are in manufacturing. So in recent decades, the tertiary sector has gotten so large that economists have begun to divide it into smaller segments. The quaternary sector is the knowledge-based sector that includes research and development, business consulting, financial services, higher level education, public administration, and software development. The quinary sector consists of the highest levels of decision making and includes the top officials in various levels of government and business. A decision made by a country's president or senior advisors or by corporate executives can affect millions of people. As countries industrialized, the primary sector shrank and the secondary sector grew. As part of this shift, countries became wealthier because wages in the secondary sector were higher than those in the primary sector. In addition to higher wages, the secondary sector jobs also had a greater multiplier effect, a term for the potential of a job to produce additional jobs. For example, when a tire manufacturer expanded a plant and created 100 new jobs in a community, the new workers would have more money to spend on food, clothes, movies, and other items from nearby businesses. These businesses would prosper and sometimes add more staff. So that's what the multiplier effect is. However, the multiplier effect also works in reverse. In recent decades, the shrinkage of the secondary workforce in the United States and other developed countries has caused many other businesses to suffer as well. In addition, the opening of a new store can have a negative effect on other stores in the region. A large retail store opening in a community might employ hundreds of people, but smaller stores nearby might close or lay off employees. Governments in developed countries often attempt to replace manufacturing jobs lost because of deindustrialization and automation with new quaternary jobs. Both types of jobs pay higher than average wages and both can generate additional jobs. Cities such as Denver, Pittsburgh, and Austin are using quaternary jobs to drive their rapidly growing economies. With research and high-tech jobs flowing into cities, other sectors of the economy are benefiting. especially entertainment, tourism, and education. This quaternary sector growth also boosts the secondary because it requires construction and improved infrastructure. One challenge of shifting from manufacturing to quaternary jobs is that many of the displaced workers do not possess the skills required for the new jobs. If you are a factory worker at a Ford plant in Detroit, Michigan that closed down, you don't have the skills to necessarily get one of those high paying high tech jobs in Denver. And so those people in Detroit kind of get left behind. And that is really what has happened to the region of the country that we call the Rust Belt. So here is a good chart that I wanted to include in your notes to show you again the breakdown of the three major sectors. So primary sector, working directly with natural resources. Secondary sector, you're turning those natural resources into a tangible product. And then the tertiary is that service sector of the economy. The next section, you will be able to use Alfred Weber's model to explain industrial location. Alfred Weber's model of industrial location emphasized the owner's desire to minimize transportation and labor cost and maximize agglomeration economies. An agglomeration is a clustering together of like businesses for mutual benefit. So there are various theories on industrial location, and you're going to definitely need to understand all of these different things in relation to them. So we're really going to focus on the least cost theory, which also has to do with bulk gaining versus bulk reducing industry. Geographers have developed many models explaining the geographic distribution of economic activities. By focusing on the key factors in a process, a model is useful for making predictions about how a change in one factor affects the entire process. By 1909, the German economist Alfred Weber developed an influential theory known as the least cost theory to explain the key decisions made by businesses about where to locate factories. Least cost theory attempts to predict the location of a manufacturing site, meaning a factory, relative to the location of the resources needed to produce the product and where the final product will be sold. So that's the market. So Weber's theory focuses on three key variables: transportation, labor, and agglomeration. The aluminum industry is one type of industry that is still an energy-oriented or energy-dependent industry. Even though the aluminum industry requires raw materials such as the minerals, the energy demanded is so high that factories are built in close proximity to major sources of abundant, cheap power. China and Canada are major producers of aluminum, but Iceland's production is on the rise because it has abundant and cheap geothermal energy. One major factor in the cost of obtaining raw materials and shipping finished products is weight. The heavier an item, the higher the cost of transporting it. Copper ore is very heavy, but most of the ore is waste and is discarded in the refining process. Hence, transporting copper ore is expensive, but transporting refined copper is not. This is known as a bulk reducing industry. In bulk reducing industries, companies try to locate processing plants near the source of the raw material. So you're going to want to put your processing plant for copper right next to where you're going to mine the copper. That way you can get rid of all of the ore that you don't need. And it's okay to transport that final finished copper further because it's a lot lighter weight. Products that are heaviest when finished are known as bulk gaining. So bulk gaining industries are things like soft drinks. The heaviest component in any type of soft drink or beer bottling is water. Since water is widely available, companies try to add it as close to the market as possible rather than pay to ship the weight for the water. For example, soft drinks are often sold to restaurants as thick syrup and then water is added at the restaurant. In bulk gaining industries, companies try to locate factories near the market. So Coca-Cola, for example, has bottling plants all over the world. If you drink a Coca-Cola in Shanghai, China, it was made in Shanghai, China. If you drink it in Atlanta, it was made in Atlanta. If you actually drink it in Gainesville, it was made in Gainesville. That's how many different bottling plants there are because they don't want to have to ship the product far. Next up is the importance of energy. The history of manufacturing demonstrates the importance of a source of power. The type of power influenced where factories were established. Water power was not mobile, so early mills and factories were located on streams and rivers. Coal could be transported, so companies had wider options for where to locate factories. However, coal is bulky and expensive to transport. It was important to early manufacturing that industrial plants, even iron mills that relied on a bulky raw material such as iron ore, were still located near the coal fields. So that's why industry started in Great Britain, again, because they had tons of coal, and moved to Germany, again, where they have tons of coal, to the United States, where we have tons of coal, today to China and India, where they have tons of coal. With the development of electricity in the late 19th century, power became even more mobile. It could move through wires, hence the location of energy sources became less important, but still important. So according to Weber's least cost theory, the three major factors that determine where you should put your factory are transportation, labor, and agglomeration. So according to Weber, transportation is the most important. So that would be that bulk gaining versus bulk reducing industries. Do you want to be close to the raw material if you are a bulk reducing industry, or do you want to be close to the market because you're a bulk gaining industry? Labor is also a part of this. High labor costs reduced profits. So you may locate further from inputs if the market for cheap labor is made up in terms of transportation costs. A good way to explain this is textiles today. Textiles are anything made from cloth, so that's things like clothing. The reason why we can make our clothing in very far away places like Indonesia today is because clothing is not expensive to transport, but it's very labor dependent. And so because of that labor intensiveness, you have to have a lot of people to make the clothes. You want to pay them the least amount. It's not very expensive to transport, is why clothes are made very far away in places like Bangladesh and Indonesia, and then shipped all the way to places like the United States and sold. And then the third aspect of the least cost theory is agglomeration. So similar businesses cluster in the same area to help support and reduce costs. Please take a few minutes and definitely read over these things in terms of comparing Weber's model versus real conditions. Because what's important to understand about all models is they really assume kind of like in a perfect world, this is how things would be. And that's true from the demographic transition model to von Thunen's model to now Weber's model. That is really kind of true about all geographic models. So here are some of the major factors in locating a manufacturing facility. So if you're looking for large scale, medium versus small, these are the various different things that you're going to look into. So what's important to note is that you will hear politicians and various different people here in the United States talk about manufacturing jobs. And it is true, we've lost over 2 million manufacturing jobs here in the US. And it has definitely hurt certain places, especially those cities in the Rust Belt like Toledo, Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan. Those cities have lost a tremendous amount of their economic base as well as their population because of the loss of manufacturing. You always hear that, all those jobs went overseas, and you can see that, yes, there's been a sizable amount that have gone overseas, but not nearly as many as we lost. And that's again because most of the jobs have been lost to machines, not to other places. We've also seen the growth in other types of non-manufacturing jobs in various different places. So that really concludes it for chapter 15. Next week we will cover chapter 16. So please watch the video that I have assigned for you guys this week. It's really good. It's all about manufacturing here in the US, and it covers a lot of these different things from Fordism to post-Fordism and so forth.